So hello everybody and welcome to yet another episode of Biographics. I'm your interim host, Karl Smallwood. Yes, that is my real name, and today we're talking about Dutch Schultz, the beer baron of the Bronx. And before we get to the topic of today's video, I should apologise that I have a cold, so yeah, my voice is going to be more annoying than usual for the people in the comments leaving those hurtful messages about the way I talk. So I'm trying, but if I don't work, I don't get paid, and I like affording food, rent, and clothing. So let's get to it. Beer, bloodshed, and buried treasure. That is the legacy left behind by one of New York's most notorious malefactors, mobsters, and bootleggers, Dutch Schultz. Like many other criminals of his era, Schultz saw Prohibition as not a law to be followed, but a golden ticket to a life full of riches and power. And he was right, although many people did have to die for him to achieve his goals. He fought not one, but two bloody gang wars in order to firmly establish himself as New York's premier distributor of illegal hooch, the cause of and the solution to all of life's problems.
To alcohol!
Before we continue, I'd like to pull back the curtain on the production of these videos a little bit to tell you guys about something the authors of scripts like to do sometimes. That is, leave little comments in their scripts that provide things like pronunciation guides. Sometimes they'll put jokes in there, and other times they'll add little addendums to provide context for certain parts of the script. What the author of today's script has done is they just include a little addendum saying this is a Simpsons reference, and as a pro tip, you don't need to do that. If the very first thing I thought of when I saw the title of this script was, oh, Homer Simpson, the beer baron episode, let's go. And I was going to make beer baron references all the way through this thing. But that's just very cute, and I appreciate that. Thank you to the author. Let's move on. So, the early years. Dutch Schultz was born Arthur Simon Flegenheimer on August 6th, 1902 in the Bronx to a couple of German Jewish immigrants named Hermann and Emma Flegenheimer. He adopted the name Dutch Schultz and was also sometimes known as simply the Dutchman pretty early on in his criminal career, and we're going to stick with that from the beginning to make it less confusing. Presumably Schultz concluded quite reasonably, we think, that nobody would be intimidated by somebody called Arthur Flegenheimer. I mean, the Flegenheimer gang doesn't really strike fear into the hearts of men. And I say that as a Smallwood. I'm reminded of my mum, who is called, I'm not going to say her first name, but her last name is Smallwood, and she is currently engaged to be married to a man with the last name Woodcock. This is not a joke.
You've got great taste in men. Great taste.
Emma Flegenheimer tried to instill a devout and modest upbringing into her son, but it was no use. Growing up on the mean streets of the Bronx, young Dutch frequently got into scraps with other kids and eventually joined a gang for added protection and to look cool. And it probably won't be much of a surprise to you to find out that he didn't really care much for school. And here's a bonus fact for you trivia buffs out there. The principal of Schultz's school was Dr. John F. Condon, who would later attain infamy during the Lindbergh baby case, as he was the one who delivered the $50,000 ransom to the kidnappers, only to be later double-crossed. But that's a story for another day. Now, at some point during Dutch's childhood, his father abandoned the family. We're not really sure when exactly that was. Some sources say Dutch was 14 years old, and others claim that Hermann Flegenheimer was already gone by the 1910 census, which would make Dutch 8 years or younger. And some sources say that Hermann never left at all and died. Anyway, the salient point here is that the family was left without its breadwinner, so Dutch eventually dropped out of school completely to make himself and his family some money. An honest day's pay for an honest day's work was never really on the cards for Schultz, but he thought he'd give it the old college try. He worked a few odd jobs before deciding that they all left him too poor and too unhappy to keep going. Been there. Instead, he started hanging out at a local nightclub owned by a two-bit gangster called Marcel Poffo, hoping that he would find some better work there. Poffo had a fairly long rap sheet full of stick-ups, burglaries, bank robberies, and probably some jaywalking too, a thing I can't believe is a crime in America. It was only normal that Schultz would try to emulate his new mentor. He began holding up card games and committing burglaries, but he was still just a greenhorn at this whole crime thing. So when he was 17 years old, he was caught trying to break into an apartment. He was arrested and sentenced to 17 months in prison and sent to Roosevelt Island, still known as Blackwell's Island at the time. Dutch was released on parole in December of 1920, but he had no intention of changing his criminal ways and going straight, especially now that a golden goose had been presented to him, that being the United States Congress passing the Volstead Act and America entering Prohibition. The beer wars begin. Once he was out of prison, Schultz's only concern was to make money, and lots of it. He went back to one of his old jobs with a trucking company and was pleasantly surprised to discover that, while he was behind bars, they had decided to turn to the dark side and become a smuggling operation, bringing booze from Canada. He rode with them for a while, earning a few bucks here and there, but more importantly, making the connections that he needed with New York's criminal underworld. Schultz met and even worked with some important gangsters during this time, such as Arnold Rothstein, Lucky Luciano, and an Irish mobster called Jack Legs Diamond, but more on him later because he does play quite a key role in this story. By the mid-1920s, Schultz's basic bootlegging business led to another gig, working in a speakeasy in the Bronx for an old childhood friend and up-and-coming gangster himself named Joey Noe. The two of them saw how much money there was to be made from just selling booze, especially illegal booze, so they got their own little operation off the ground, with Noe eventually taking on Schultz as a full-time partner. By this point, Dutch Schultz was settling nicely into the deserved reputation as a violent and bloodthirsty psychopath that you would not want to mess with. The kind of guy that will prove useful to have when you were trying to strong-arm your way into the bootlegging market. Schultz used his menacing ways to intimidate rival saloon owners into buying beer from them and them exclusively, on occasion even kidnapping and torturing those who refused to see eye to eye with him and his business partner. With that kind of reputation, it was only a couple of years until the dynamic duo became the most prominent hooch suppliers in all of the Bronx, so naturally they looked to expand their operation into Manhattan. Well, this caused a problem. There was a lot of money on the line, and other people were not just going to give up their slice of the pie so willingly, just because the Noe Schultz gang was in town. As you might imagine, Manhattan was already pretty well supplied with intoxicating spirits, so the Dutchman's arrival brought him into conflict with the aforementioned Legs Diamond and the Irish mob. It did not take long for this one to get bloody. Diamond wanted to cut the head off the serpent right off the bat, so the first domino to fall was none other than Joey Noe himself. On the night of October 15th, 1928, Noe and Dutch stopped at the Swanee Club next to Harlem's iconic Apollo Theatre. The hangout was supposed doing a lot of heavy lifting here to be safe ground, even between feuding gangsters who wanted each other dead, sort of like the Continental from John Wick. The rule was that when two rival mobsters ran into each other, the one who arrived last had to sit down for just a single drink and then leave. The club was also a popular hotspot with off-duty cops, which helped maintain its neutral status. Violence inside the Swanee Club might have been off limits, but once you're out the door, you were on your own. Much like the Continental. That night, Schultz and Noe stayed and partied until the wee hours of the morning. Around 7 a.m, Joey Noe finally left the club and was making his way towards his parked car when a blue Cadillac pulled up and two men opened fire. Noe was hit multiple times, but was thankfully wearing a bulletproof vest, so he did not collapse immediately. Instead, he pulled out his own gun, returned fire at the getaway vehicle. The Cadillac zigzagged violently and sideswiped a parked car before disappearing into the night, leaving behind a car door as a souvenir. It was clear that Noe had hit his target, but his wounds finally got the better of him, and he crumpled to the ground, barely clinging to life. Later that same night, police found the blue caddy abandoned on the Lower East Side. Inside, on the back seat, was the dead body of triggerman Louis Weinberg, who clearly got the worst of it from the shootout with Joey. But Schultz's partner wasn't exactly in mint condition himself. Taken to the Roosevelt Hospital, doctors did manage to stabilize him for the time being, but a recovery was not on the cards. Noe lingered around for another month or so before finally shuffling off this mortal coil in November of 1928. Schultz was understandably devastated by the loss of the one person in his line of work he could actually call a friend and mean it, but he was consoled by the fact that he was now the sole boss of their entire bootlegging empire. Still, his issue with Legs Diamond were far from settled. It has often been claimed, although never substantiated, we are talking about the often murky world of organised crime here, that Schultz had Diamond's associate and mentor Arnold Rothstein killed in retaliation for Noe's death. Ostensibly, Rothstein was shot over an unpaid gambling debt, although there are some who believe it was the Dutchman who had ordered the hit. Either way, it was clear that the gang war would continue until either Schultz or Diamond was dead. Dutch's problem, however, is that his rival was something of a bullet sponge who simply just refused to die. Legs Diamond had been shot 14 times on no less than 4 separate occasions, and he survived every single time, earning him the additional nickname of, quite fittingly, the Clay Pigeon. It's presumed that at least one, if not 2 of these assassination attempts happened on Dutch's orders, but Legs Diamond wasn't exactly the kind of guy to get shot and tell, so we can't really say for sure. Eventually though, Diamond's luck did run out, and on December of 1931, he was in Albany, New York, celebrating with friends his acquittal in a kidnapping trial. just mob boss things. Afterwards, he abandoned the party to meet up with his mistress, and after that encounter was finished, he drunkenly stumbled into his hotel room and passed out. 2 or more assassins paid him a visit, and this time they took no chances. Diamond was shot 3 times in the head from close range, and that was finally enough to put him down for the count. Again, Schultz was always the main suspect behind the hit, but nothing concrete ever tied him to the murder. With Legs, Diamond and his gang out of the way, Schultz had a clear path to proclaim himself the undisputed beer baron of New York. Except not quite, because as soon as one threat was eliminated, another one emerged. And if we are putting clips in of this, can we put in my favourite moment of the Beer Baron episode where, like, I actually watched it the other day. It's just the guy's like, I'll get you, Beer Baron, and you just hear from the distance. I'm like, no, you won't. That always cracked me up. The Beer Baron versus the Mad Dog. The gang war between Schultz and Diamond left quite a few bodies in its wake, but as it turned out, this was just the appetizer to the main course that was about to be unleashed on the streets of New York. This time, it was one of Schultz's own associates who decided to try and shoot his way to the top, an Irish hitman by the name of Vincent Mad Dog Karl. Karl was the type of guy who made Schultz, who remember we described as being a psychopath, look like a level-headed and tranquil individual. Karl had a very, very itchy trigger finger and would shoot at the slightest provocation, and he really didn't care who was in his way. In fact, his most notorious moment came when he mercilessly gunned down a 5-year-old child during a failed kidnapping. The boy wasn't the intended target, he was just an innocent bystander who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That wrong place and time being anywhere near Karl. The killer was arrested, but he got off scot-free due to a lack of evidence and a problematic witness. However, from that day on, he became known as the Mad Dog and the Baby Killer. The former being the nickname he decided to keep because, Baby Killer isn't exactly going to... Actually, it's probably going to inspire fear, but not a lot of respect. Initially, Schultz made good use of the Mad Dog's talents. The latter became one of the Dutchman's main enforcers and often paid visits to bar owners who refused to sell his booze. In 1927, he was even put on trial for the murder of a speakeasy owner, but was acquitted thanks to some jury interference from his boss. But Karl got too big for his britches pretty fast, feeling invincible, as is wont to happen when you can just shoot people with impunity. He started doing off-the-book jobs without Dutch's permission, such as robberies and kidnappings, and when Schultz confronted him, not only did Karl not apologise, but then doubled down and demanded to be made a partner. After all, Joey Noe wasn't around anymore, so who better than the Mad Dog? Unsurprisingly, Schultz turned down Karl's offer, as tempting as it must have been. But now we had a problem, since it was clear that Karl wasn't the type of guy who would take the rejection lying down. His moniker was very fitting, since Dutch felt like he had a Mad Dog on the loose and he had to put it down. But Karl had been busy forming his own little gang and was ready to go to war against the Dutch criminal empire. Now, it's hard to say exactly how many people died as a direct result of this conflict, which lasted 2 years between 1930 and 1932, because at the time, New York City was something of a war zone. It was also dealing with a mafia war, which was called the Castelmarase, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. I'm probably not, I'm sorry, between mafia factions. But if you want to find out more about that one, you can check out our other multiple videos, some of which are presented by me, on Italian mobsters, because we've covered that ground several times before. Some have reported that Karl and his crew killed around 20 of Schultz's men, though the Dutchman himself was careful to never get caught in the crossfire. He even cut down on his own drinking during this period to have his wits about him more. Again, I'll make a reference to the Simpsons Prohibition episode of Prohibition was great, people were drinking more, partying, but without alcohol, Prohibition kinda sucks. So the way Karl was going through the opposition like a hot knife through butter, he may have emerged triumphant and become the new beer baron, if not for his own hubris and aforementioned sense of invincibility. Taking on Dutch Schultz was bad enough, but what if he decided to also make enemies of the mafia and the Irish mob? Well, that's exactly what Karl did, living up to his moniker of the Mad Dog. As we said, he had no qualms about taking any job as long as the pay was good, and he didn't care who the target was, even if the target was, say, a mob boss. Unsurprisingly, this approach to life doesn't earn you a lot of friends, but does make you a lot of enemies. And he made enemies of the Irish Gopher gang when he kidnapped for ransom a close associate of the gang's leader, Oni Madden. He also then doubled down on how screwed he was by pissing off the mafia when he accepted a hit on Lucky Luciano on behalf of his boss/enemy, Salvatore Maranzano. But Luciano found out about it and ordered a faster, more efficient and successful hit on Maranzano, and by the time Karl was ready to strike, his employer was already dead. Luciano was now the new head of the mafia and was very aware that Karl was going to try and kill him. It's said that there was a point when Schultz, Madden and Luciano had all put out a price on Vincent Karl's head at the same time, resulting in basically every criminal in New York with a gun going after him. Karl was basically John Wick without the dead dog, the badass factor, the coolness factor of being Keanu Reeves, or just any of the charisma that he displayed due to the whole killing a child thing. So he wasn't really like John Wick, but with that kind of heat on him, his demise would be inevitable as much as it would be bloody. On February 1st, 1932, 4 gunmen working for Schultz or Madden, we don't know for sure, burst in on a card game in progress in the North Bronx that Karl was supposed to attend and opened fire indiscriminately on all 6 people in that room, killing 3 and wounding the rest, but still not getting Karl because he'd not arrived yet. And just something that always strikes me as surprising, which I ended up doing independent research on, is it's really hard to kill somebody with a gun. Obviously, guns kill people a lot, but so many of these Biographics videos I've done are people getting shot legs down 14 times and not dying, and people walking into rooms with machine guns and opening fire indiscriminately and just not killing everyone there, which leads to believe gangsters are really bad at shooting people, surprisingly bad, because the amount of these videos that I've done where just at some point in the script you're this guy, they walked in with a machine gun, opened fire, no one died. It's what are they doing? The shootout was big news in the press of the day. It wasn't quite on the level of a St. Valentine's Day massacre, sure, but it was considered to be up there. There was a lot of pressure to end the war, so talk of a truce emerged in the days that followed. Karl sort of trusted only Madden more than the others, which was a mistake since Madden totally set him up for Schultz's men to gun him down in broad daylight. On February 8th, 1932, Karl entered a pharmacy to use the telephone. He was immediately followed inside by a hitman who pulled out a Tommy gun and gunned him down. With his final challenger dealt with, Dutch Schultz could now proclaim himself the undisputed beer baron of New York, just in time for the end of Prohibition. The legal woes. Prohibition was out, and with legal alcohol once again filling the glasses of happy barflies throughout the country, the need for speakeasies and bootleg hooch dwindled. This meant that men like Dutch Schultz needed to find new avenues of revenue to replace the lost golden goose. Well, for Dutch, this meant using his considerable resources and criminal influence to expand into various rackets like extortion, running numbers and controlling the unions. But whenever someone gains territory in a situation like this, there's usually someone else who's losing it, and they are bound to be unhappy because there's a lot of money at stake. Once again, Dutch made some enemies, especially among the black gangs of Harlem, but none of them really posed a serious threat to him like Karl and Diamond had. In fact, by this point, Schultz's gang had gotten so powerful, he was the only outfit left in New York that could rival the Italian mafia in scope of its operations. In fact, when talking about this period, people often mention the Big Six, which refers to the 5 mafia families and the Schultz gang, just as an idea of how important he was in regards to his criminal influence and reach. Although rival outfits did not pose much of a threat to Dutch, he still had to contend with, as all bosses do, internal problems. One of his top lieutenants, a guy named Jules Martin, who acted as the front for many of Schultz's businesses, was caught skimming off the top. Everyone knew what the end result would be, but as it so happened, Schultz's lawyer, Dixie Davis, was there to witness the scene and would describe it in a tell-all book. He would write, and I quote, "Dutch Schultz was ugly. He'd been drinking and suddenly he had his gun out. The Dutchman wore his pistol under his vest, tucked inside his pants, right against his belly. One jerk at his vest and he had it in his hand. All in the same quick motion, he swung it up, stuck it in Jules Martin's mouth and pulled the trigger. It was as simple and undramatic as that one quick motion of the hand. The Dutchman did that murder just as casually as if he was picking his teeth." But neither rival gangs nor disloyal employees were Schultz's biggest headache. Instead, that took the form of New York prosecutor Thomas Dewey, a man who rose through the ranks of the legal system by declaring war on organised crime and actually meaning it and doing something about it. The biggest whale he would land was sending Lucky Luciano to prison for 30 to 50 years. Before that, he set his sights on Dutch Schultz. Dewey's crusade against the Dutchman began in the early 30s while Prohibition was still in effect. At first, it looked like Dutch would beat the Raab, but in 1933, Dewey managed to send another notorious bootlegger, Waxy Gordon, to prison for 10 years. Schultz was getting nervous, but against all odds, managed to get acquitted in his first 2 trials, both for various counts related to tax evasion. Yep. It's always tax evasion. They got Al Capone, they'll get you too. Pay your taxes, folks. Dewey, however, refused to surrender. Once he was made special prosecutor in 1935, he intended to indict Schultz again and bring him before a special grand jury. For Dutch, the solution to his problems became obvious. shoot Dewey in the face. Mayhem at the Chop House. By that point, the commission had been formed, a special mafia committee consisting of the most powerful criminal outfits in the country, which tried to govern in a somewhat egalitarian manner. In essence, all the gangs decided to join together and be like, hey, let's just commit more crimes. Let's not fight, because fighting doesn't earn money. Crimes make us money. And what they do instead of fighting is just work out how to, best work together. So although the commission was a mafia organization, several prominent Jewish mobsters were closely associated with it. Schultz was one of these Jewish associates. So when he decided to off Dewey, he went to the commission first to request permission to shoot him in the face. He received a resounding no, as the others argued that assassinating such a high-profile target like Dewey Thomas would bring down a massive law enforcement crackdown on every single one of them. As you might imagine, Dutch Schultz was not the kind of guy who took rejection well, so he basically said, screw you, I'm going to shoot him in the face anyway. This presented the commission with its first serious issue. Schultz wasn't just some schmuck off the street, but he openly ignored their decision and presented a danger to every single one of their operations. There was only one answer, that to kill Dutch before he killed Dewey. Once the decision was made to off Dutch, it didn't take long to materialise. On October 23rd, 1935, the Dutchman was in Newark, New Jersey, having a private dinner with 3 associates at the Palace Chop House. The men selected to do the deed were Charles Workman and Mendy Weiss, 2 hitmen with Murder Incorporated. They simply entered the restaurant and opened fire indiscriminately. They hit all the men at the table multiple times, but Dutch wasn't among them, having quite fortunately just gone to the bathroom to relieve himself. Workman, not wanting to leave the job unfinished, entered the men's room and hit Schultz only once, but it was enough to get the job done. Oddly enough, none of the 4 men died inside the restaurant. They were all taken to the hospital alive and well, then started dropping one by one. Schultz himself lingered for an entire day, drifting in and out of consciousness. The police did try to question him about what had gone on, but he only delivered these strange, nonsensical garden path ramblings, which oddly enough became popular enough that writer William S. Burroughs later used them to write a screenplay titled, quite fittingly, The Last Words of Dutch Schultz. And so, the Dutchman was dead. His criminal empire was broken up piece by piece and divided among the commission, and guess all that's left now is to find his buried treasure. Now, that's right, Schultz left behind a very unusual legacy, more befitting a pirate than a mobster. For 90 years, there's been talk that Dutch had hid a large fortune somewhere in the Catskills Mountains in the form of gold, jewels, and bearer bonds, in a waterproof safe, some sources say a big steel box, just in case he ever had to go on the run. Since then, treasure hunters have been on the lookout trying to interpret Schultz's last words as clues to his buried booty, as if he were the Sphinx or something like that. So far, no luck, but who knows, maybe someone, somewhere, will find the lost Dutchman's gold. And thus, the legacy of Dutch Schultz continues, at least in some way or form. So I hope everybody out there found this video to be entertaining, educational and informative. I once again apologise for my voice. I'm going to go straight to bed after this, drink some hot lemon and water and hopefully sweat out this cold. I'll try my best. If you did enjoy the video, you can go find links to the author's socials below, links to my socials while you're down there clicking on things. You can like the video, comment, feedback, suggestions, all that good stuff. Subscribe for more content like this. And as I always like to say at the end of each video I present, go out there and have the day that you deserve. Cheers.